"She's dying in the snow," little boy begged. "Mountain man, please save my mama." The wind screamed through the Colorado wilderness like a living beast. Snow fell so thick it swallowed the road, the trees, even the sound of breath. Inside that blizzard stumbled a woman and her son. Gracie Thompson, 27 years old, heavy-set and trembling, fought to keep her footing as the storm tore at her shawl. Her little boy Tommy, only 9, clung to her skirt. "Mama, I can't see the road," he cried, voice almost lost in the howl. Grace tried to answer, but her lips were blue, her body stiff from cold. Their wagon had broken hours ago, the horses lost to the storm. She had carried Tommy as far as she could until her knees finally gave out. "Tommy," she gasped, sinking into the snow, "you have to keep walking. Find someone, anyone." "I won't leave you, Mama." "You must." Her eyes filled with tears that froze before they could fall. "Go, sweetheart. Go before it's too late." Tommy hesitated only a second, then pressed his little mitten to her face. "I'll find help. I promise." He turned and ran into the white darkness, calling for help that the wind tried to devour. In a small cabin hidden deep among the pines, Elijah Eli Stone stirred from his chair at the sound of frantic knocking. He was a man built from mountain and sorrow, tall, broad, with a beard that had long forgotten laughter. When he opened the door, a boy collapsed at his feet, snow clinging to his hair and lashes. "Please," Tommy sobbed, "Mama's dying in the snow. You gotta save her." Eli knelt beside him. "Where?" Tommy pointed toward the white beyond the trees. "She's not far. She's heavy, sir. People always said she was too fat, too slow, but she's the best mama in the world." Eli grabbed his coat and rifle without another word. "Stay by the fire, boy," he said, voice firm. "I'll bring your mama home." And into the storm he went. The blizzard swallowed Elijah Eli Stone whole as he pushed through the forest, the snow rising to his knees, the cold biting through even his thick wool coat. He moved like a man who'd done this before, someone who'd already walked through worse storms. "Keep shouting, boy," he called over his shoulder. From behind him, the faint voice of Tommy carried through the wind. "This way. Mama's over here." Minutes stretched into hours until finally, in the dim light of his lantern, Eli saw a shape half buried beneath the snow. A woman, frozen still, one hand clutching a torn shawl, the other reaching toward the sky. He dropped to his knees beside her. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Her lips were pale, her face rimmed with ice. But when he brushed the snow from her cheek, he felt it, the faintest flutter of breath. "She's alive," he muttered. Without hesitation, he slid his arms beneath her. She was heavy, yes, nearly 300 pounds. But Eli lifted her as though the mountain itself had lent him its strength. "Hold the light, son," he ordered. Tommy ran ahead, tears freezing on his cheeks, lighting the path back to the cabin. Behind him came Eli, carrying Grace through the storm like something sacred. By the time they reached the cabin, Grace was barely conscious. Eli laid her on his bed near the fire, stripped away the wet blankets, and began rubbing her arms and legs with rough wool. "Tommy, heat more water," he said firmly, "and keep that fire fed." The boy obeyed, his small hands trembling but determined. Together they worked in silence until the woman on the bed finally stirred. "Tommy," she whispered weakly, "my baby." "I'm right here, Mama," the boy cried, clutching her hand. "You're safe now. Uncle Eli saved you." Eli paused, the words catching him off guard. Uncle Eli. It had been a long time since anyone had called him family. "You'll live," he said quietly, tucking the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "You just need rest and heat. The mountain's cruel, but not unbeatable." Her eyes fluttered open for the first time, meeting his. "Who are you?" "Name's Elijah Stone," he replied. "You can call me Eli, and you're lucky your boy's got more courage than most grown men." Grace tried to smile, but her lips trembled. "He's all I have." Hours later, when the storm had quieted, Grace drifted between sleep and wakefulness. In the faint firelight, she could see Eli moving about the cabin, his hand sure, his movement steady. He brewed tea, checked her pulse, adjusted her blankets. There was a quiet dignity in the way he worked, like a man who'd spent his life saving others, even when he couldn't save himself. Why are you helping us?" she asked softly when he finally sat beside her. He looked into the fire. "Because I once had a wife and a little girl who didn't make it through a winter like this." "I'm sorry," Grace whispered. He nodded once. "Me too. Been alone since. Figured maybe I owed the world a life I couldn't save." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "Then maybe you just saved the right one this time." Eli met her gaze, and for the first time in years, something in him softened. That night, after she fell asleep, Tommy curled up near the hearth. Eli pulled a blanket over the boy and sat back in his chair, watching the snow fall outside the window. He'd lived years without a reason to care if he saw the next morning, but now, in that little cabin, with the sound of two heartbeats that weren't his own, he realized, for the first time in a decade, he didn't feel alone. By morning, the storm had buried the world in silence. The snow outside reached halfway up the windows, sealing the small cabin off from everything below. For 7 long days, the mountain became its own world, a world of firelight, whispering wind, and 3 souls learning how to breathe again. Gracie Thompson, woke slowly that first morning, the ache in her body replaced by the unfamiliar comfort of warmth. She blinked at the sight of wooden beams above her, a soft quilt tucked under her chin, and the steady crackle of fire beside the bed. "Morning!" came Elijah, Eli Stone's deep voice from across the room. He sat at the table mending a leather strap, eyes focused, movements deliberate. "Where's Tommy?" she whispered, still weak. He nodded toward the corner. The boy was fast asleep, curled up under a wool blanket, a faint smile on his face. Grace exhaled in relief. "Thank God." Eli poured water into a tin cup and handed it to her. "Drink. You were half frozen when we found you." She took it, her hands shaking. "I don't know how to thank you." "Don't," he said quietly. "Just get better." As the hours passed, Grace regained strength. By the second day, she was sitting near the fire, mending Tommy's torn mittens. Eli watched from across the room, pretending not to stare, but he couldn't help it. There was something different about her presence. He'd been alone so long that he'd forgotten what a home felt like when laughter returned to its corners. Tommy adored him. The boy followed Eli everywhere, from the woodpile to the barn, asking endless questions. "Uncle Eli, were you ever in a war?" "Once." "Did you win?" Eli gave a small smile. "I survived. That's winning enough." Grace laughed softly when she overheard. The sound startled Eli more than he expected. Light, gentle, like spring, breaking through frost. On the fourth night, she helped him cook supper. She could barely stand at first, but insisted. "If I can't work, I'll go mad," she said. He tried to protest, but she waved him off. "You saved my life, Mr. Stone. Let me at least stir the pot." He watched her as she moved, carefully, deliberately, her cheeks flushed from the firelight. He noticed the kindness in her hands, the care in her eyes when she checked on Tommy. For the first time in years, his cabin didn't feel like a tomb. When they ate, she whispered, "It's been a long time since someone sat at a table with us." Eli looked at the boy, then at her. "Well, that's going to change." By the fifth day, the snow began to ease. The world outside glistened like glass beneath the sun. Grace stood at the window, staring out. "I thought I'd never see light again," she murmured. Eli joined her, his tall frame filling the space beside her. "The mountain likes to test people. If you're still standing after a storm like that, it means it's decided you belong." She smiled faintly. "Maybe it's not the only one testing me." He looked at her then, really looked. The shadows under her eyes, the quiet strength behind them, the softness that hadn't been crushed by years of judgment. "You've got more fight in you than most men I've met," he said. "That's not something to be ashamed of." Grace swallowed hard. "Most people only ever saw my weight. I see a woman who didn't give up in a blizzard." He paused, his voice softening. "And a boy who loves her enough to walk through hell to find help. That says more than size ever could." Her eyes shimmered, but she turned away, blinking back tears. That night, Tommy fell asleep early by the fire. Grace sat quietly, staring into the flames. "Why did you help us, really?" she asked. "You didn't even know our names." Eli leaned back in his chair, the firelight flickering across his face. "Because once I couldn't save the people I loved. Maybe God gave me another chance." She reached out and gently placed her hand over his. "Then I'm glad he did." For the first time in years, Elijah Stone didn't feel haunted by ghosts. He felt human again. And as snow drifted softly against the windows, Grace closed her eyes and whispered a prayer, not of fear, but of gratitude. Some storms, she realized, don't come to destroy you. They come to bring you home. When the last of the storm clouds broke, the valley below glittered like a field of diamonds. The air was crisp, the world reborn. Inside the little cabin, firelight danced across the walls, and for the first time in years, Eli Stone felt something close to peace. The blizzard had ended, but what remained between the three of them was something warmer, steadier, alive. Grace Thompson woke early that morning to the smell of bacon and fresh coffee. She sat up, blinking at the sight of Tommy setting the table while Eli flipped breakfast on a cast-iron skillet. "You're teaching him to cook?" she asked, smiling. "Man's got to learn sometime," Eli said with a shrug. "Can't live on jerky forever." Tommy grinned. "Uncle Eli says the secret to pancakes is not being afraid to burn the first one." Grace laughed, a sound that seemed to fill every corner of the cabin. "That sounds about right." Eli glanced over his shoulder at her. "You look better this morning." "I feel better," she admitted. "Better than I've felt in years." "Good," he said simply. "You deserve to." As days passed, they fell into a quiet rhythm. 3 lives stitched together by routine, by care, by something deeper they didn't yet name. Grace tended to small chores, mended Eli's shirts, and taught Tommy to read by the fire at night. Eli rebuilt the woodpile, repaired the fence, and hunted fresh game to keep them through spring. They shared everything: the work, the laughter, the silence. When Tommy would wander outside, Eli and Grace often found themselves sitting across from each other at the table, talking in low voices. "I never thought I'd smile again after my husband died," she confessed one evening, eyes downcast. "I tried to be strong for Tommy, but there are nights when loneliness feels like a living thing." Eli looked into the fire. "I know that kind of silence." She tilted her head. "You lost your wife, too?" He nodded slowly. "Her name was Clara. Fever took her and our little girl 6 winters ago. I built this cabin to get away from the world, ended up building a cage instead." Grace reached out, her fingers brushing the rough wood of the table between them. "Maybe it wasn't a cage, Eli. Maybe it was just waiting to be a home again." He met her gaze, and something in his chest stirred. Something that had slept a long time. Spring thawed the land, and the days grew longer. Grace would hum softly while she hung laundry on the line. Eli would chop wood nearby, sneaking glances when he thought she wasn't looking. The mountain air seemed to glow around her, sunlight in her hair, determination in her every movement. One afternoon, Tommy came running up the hill, breathless with excitement. "Uncle Eli, Mama baked a pie, a real one." Eli grinned. "Well now, if that's not the best news I've heard all week." That night, the 3 of them shared that pie around the fire, laughing, teasing, living. It wasn't much, but it felt like the kind of joy that could outlast whole winters. When Tommy had gone to bed, Grace lingered by the hearth. "You've given him something he never had," she said quietly. "A man to look up to." Eli hesitated. "I only did what any man would." She shook her head. "No, most men would have shut their door. You opened yours." He smiled faintly, the light from the fire catching in his eyes. "Guess that boy's got a way of knocking sense into a man." Grace looked at him for a long moment, the warmth between them almost visible in the air. "Eli," she said softly, "you saved my life." He stood, his voice low but certain. "No, Grace, you and Tommy saved mine." That night, when she blew out the lamp, the cabin stayed warm long after the fire died down. Because warmth, she realized, doesn't just come from flame. It comes from the people who refuse to let you freeze. And for the first time since her husband's death, Grace fell asleep not as a widow, but as a woman who finally felt seen. By the time spring reached the high ridges, the snow had melted into silver rivers that whispered through the pines. The valley below was waking. Wagons creaked again on the trails, smoke rose from far-off chimneys, and word of the woman who had survived the blizzard began to spread. Grace Thompson had begun to smile again. She moved through the cabin with ease now, helping Eli mend tools and laughing with Tommy as he built a birdhouse outside. There was peace, warmth, and something quietly growing between her and Eli's stone, a love too tender yet to name. But peace in the mountains never lasted long. It was mid-afternoon when a knock came at the door, sharp, quick, unfamiliar. Eli tensed immediately, his hand instinctively brushing the rifle leaning by the wall. A tall man stood outside, his coat dusty, a Denver mailbag slung over his shoulder. "Beg pardon," he said. "You Mr. Stone?" Eli nodded. "I've a message for a Mrs. Grace Thompson. Came all the way from Denver." Grace froze. "From Denver?" Her voice trembled. Who's it from?" The man opened his ledger. "From a Miss Clara Hayes. Says she's your sister." Grace pressed a hand to her chest. "Clara." Tommy looked up. "Aunt Clara?" "Yes, baby," she whispered, taking the folded envelope. Her fingers shook as she broke the seal and began to read. The letter was brief but heavy. "Gracie, we've been worried sick. When word reached us about the wreck, we feared the worst. The miners' company settled the claim. There's money waiting in Denver, enough for you and Tommy to start over. Please come home." Clara Grace's eyes filled with tears. The promise of a new beginning, safety, money, family, everything she'd been fighting for before the storm. She looked up at Eli, her voice soft but uncertain. "They want us to come back." He said nothing for a moment, just stared into the fire. "That's good news." "Is it?" He nodded, though his jaw was tight. "You'll be safer in Denver, a proper house, a school for Tommy." Grace saw something flicker behind his calm, a sadness he didn't bother to hide. "You want us to go?" He looked down at his hands. "I want what's best for you." "And what if what's best isn't there anymore?" she asked quietly. He met her eyes, pain and restraint warring in his expression. "Don't make me answer that." That night, the cabin was quiet. Tommy slept curled beside the hearth, unaware of the weight hanging between the two adults watching over him. Grace broke the silence first. "You've been alone a long time, haven't you?" Eli nodded. "Long enough to forget what it feels like to need someone." She swallowed hard. "Then maybe you were meant to remember." He stared into the dying fire. "And maybe you were meant to leave. You've got family waiting. The mountain takes enough from people. I won't let it take you, too." Grace's voice cracked. "You didn't take me, Eli. You found me." For a moment, neither spoke. The fire hissed softly, snow melting from the roof outside. Then he stood, his shoulders heavy. "If you choose to go, I'll take you to Denver myself." In the morning, she found him already outside, hitching the horse to the wagon. The air was sharp, the kind that hurt to breathe. Tommy ran up, eyes wide. "We're leaving?" Eli rested a hand on the boy's head. "Your mama's got folks who love her waiting. You're going to have a real home." "But we have a home," Tommy said stubbornly. "Here." Grace's heart broke. She wanted to tell the boy he was right, that the only home that ever mattered was where love lived. But when she looked at Eli, the words tangled in her throat. "Go inside, Tommy," she whispered. "Mama needs to think." When the door closed behind her son, she turned to Eli. "You think love's something you can just give away because it's the right thing to do." He hesitated. "Sometimes it's the only way to prove it's real." She took a step closer, her voice shaking. "If I walk away from this mountain, from you, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering what I left behind." Eli's rough hands clenched at his sides. "And if you stay, you'll wonder what you missed." The silence that followed hurt more than the cold. Finally, Grace said, "Then maybe the mountain should decide." She turned, walking back into the cabin, tears hot against her cheeks, leaving Eli standing in the morning light, torn between letting her go and begging her to stay. The sky over Pine Mountain turned silver that morning, the color of choices that couldn't be undone. Wind rolled through the valley, carrying the smell of melting snow and pine sap, and in that quiet, Elijah Stone felt the weight of something he'd been running from his whole life, the fear of losing love again. He didn't have to wait long for it to find him. By noon, a wagon climbed the trail to the cabin. A woman sat at the reins, wrapped in a fine wool coat, her posture sharp against the wilderness. She had Grace's eyes, but colder, eyes that belonged to someone who'd never been left at the mercy of storms. "Clara Hayes?" Eli asked when she stepped down. "Yes," she said curtly, "and you must be the man my sister's been living with." Eli nodded once. "Come inside. She's expecting you." Grace stood by the hearth when Clara entered. The sisters froze for a moment, one dressed in city silk, the other in worn wool. "Oh, Gracie," Clara gasped, rushing forward to embrace her. "You're alive." Grace smiled faintly. "Alive and well, thanks to him." She nodded toward Eli, who lingered quietly by the door. Clara followed her gaze, her expression tightening. "Yes, I heard. The recluse from the mountains. People in town say you've been hiding here for years." Eli's jaw flexed, but he stayed silent. Grace frowned. "He saved my life, Clara." "And I'm grateful," Clara said quickly, "but you don't belong up here. You've got money waiting in Denver, a future for Tommy. You can't throw it all away because of a man who carried me through a blizzard and gave my son a father." Grace interrupted, her voice suddenly fierce. "Don't talk about what I owe, Clara. You weren't there when the snow was up to my chest and death was breathing down my neck." Clara blinked, taken aback. "I only meant—" "You meant well," Grace said softly. "But what's in Denver isn't life. It's just walls and silence. Up here, I found something real." Eli stepped forward, his deep voice calm but steady. "She has to decide for herself. Don't let my presence make that harder." Grace turned to him, her eyes wide. "Eli," he met her gaze, pain flickering behind his calm. "You've got a chance at safety, at comfort. I can't give you that. I can give you mountain storms and quiet mornings, nothing more." "Eli," she whispered, tears brimming, "you think that's nothing." He swallowed hard. "It's not enough." "Papa!" Tommy burst into the room then, clutching a wooden toy Eli had carved for him. "Aunt Clara says we're leaving. Tell her we're not." Eli knelt down, his big hand resting on the boy's shoulder. "Tommy, your mama's got to choose what's best for you both." "But this is best," the boy cried. "You said families don't give up on each other." The room went silent. Grace covered her mouth, trying not to sob. Clara sighed, stepping toward the door. "We leave at dawn. Think it through, Gracie." When the door closed behind her, the cabin felt emptier than it had all winter. Grace turned to Eli, voice trembling. "Why are you letting her take me?" He looked down at the floorboards. "Because every man who's ever loved someone learns the same lesson. Love isn't keeping, it's giving." She crossed the room and took his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. "And what if I want to give it right back to you?" He froze, her words striking through him like light through glass. "Grace." "Eli, I've lived through enough storms to know one thing. You don't run from the place that saves you." Before he could answer, she kissed him, soft, sure, filled with every thank you she'd never spoken. His hands found her waist, steady and reverent, as though she were something fragile and holy. When she pulled back, she whispered, "I choose this mountain. I choose you." He closed his eyes, his forehead resting against hers. "Then I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret it." Outside, the wind shifted, not cruel, but warm now, sweeping down the slopes as if the mountain itself had exhaled in relief. Tommy peeked through the window and smiled. "Mama's staying," he whispered to himself. And when Clara rode away the next morning, she left behind more than a letter and an inheritance. She left behind a woman reborn, a boy no longer afraid, and a man who had finally stopped running from his own heart. The days that followed were brighter than any Grace Thompson could remember. The heavy snows melted from the slopes, and the mountain, once cold and merciless, came alive again. Streams running free, wildflowers blooming in the clearings. For the first time in her life, Grace didn't feel like she was surviving. She was living. Every morning began with laughter now. Tommy would burst through the door with muddy boots, chasing after the chickens while Eli Stone pretended to scold him. Grace would stand on the porch, her shawl fluttering in the wind, smiling like sunlight breaking through the clouds. "Careful, young man," Eli said, catching Tommy mid-run. "Those boots have seen more mud than my horse." Tommy giggled, breathless. "Mama says dirt means you worked hard." Eli chuckled, lifting the boy effortlessly into his arms. "Then you're the hardest worker I know." Grace laughed softly. "And the hungriest. Breakfast's ready, gentlemen." Inside, the cabin had changed too. The space once filled with silence and ghosts now echoed with warmth. The smell of coffee, the sound of Tommy's chatter, the sight of Grace humming as she cooked. The table bore little gifts of their life together, a carved bird, a pressed flower, a sketch Tommy had made of the three of them standing beneath the mountains. Eli often caught himself stopping mid-task, simply watching them, his hands rough, his heart quiet. He'd lost a family once. Somehow, fate had seen fit to give him another. That night, as twilight fell, they sat together on the porch, watching the valley burn gold beneath the setting sun. Grace leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "I never thought the mountain could be beautiful," she murmured. "It was always beautiful," Eli said softly. "You just needed to see it from the right place." She smiled, turning her gaze upward. "And this is the right place?" He nodded. "As long as you're here, it is." Tommy ran up and squeezed between them, his small hands gripping theirs. "Are we staying forever?" Eli looked at Grace, his eyes warm and sure. "As long as the mountain'll have us." Grace kissed her son's forehead. "Then forever it is." The wind stirred the pines. A hawk cried in the distance. The cabin glowed from within, a beacon against the coming dusk. Grace took a deep breath, letting it fill her chest, her heart. "You know," she whispered, "I think the storm didn't try to kill us, Eli. It tried to bring us here." He smiled faintly. "Then it did its job well." Later that night, long after Tommy had fallen asleep, Grace stood by the window, watching the snow melt glisten under the moonlight. She thought of all the words that had once defined her: widow, heavy, unwanted. Now they'd been replaced by new ones: mother, loved, home. Eli came up behind her, wrapping his arms gently around her waist. "Can't sleep?" he murmured. "Too happy to," she whispered. He chuckled softly. "That's a fine problem to have." They stood together in the quiet, the firelight painting them in gold and shadow. Outside, the mountain breathed, alive eternal, at peace. And in that stillness, Grace finally understood. Love doesn't always come roaring through the door. Sometimes it trudges through the snow, steady, determined, carrying you home. When I think of Grace Thompson, I don't see a woman who almost died in the snow. I see a mother who crawled through the storm because her son still needed her. I see a man, Elijah Stone, who had buried his heart years ago and somehow found it again in her laughter. And I see a little boy whose love was fierce enough to melt the coldest winter. This wasn't just a story about survival, it was a story about belonging. Because sometimes the greatest rescues don't happen with ropes or rifles. They happen when someone looks at you, bruised and broken, and says, "You're safe now. You can rest." Eli didn't just save Grace's life. Grace and Tommy saved his soul. They taught him that family isn't built from blood or promises. It's built from moments, shared meals, quiet mornings, the sound of laughter in a cabin that once knew only silence. So, if you're listening somewhere tonight, maybe from a city apartment, maybe from a farmhouse, maybe halfway across the world, and you've ever felt lost in your own storm, remember this: love will find you in the snow. Maybe not when you expect it, maybe not how you imagine it, but it will come, steady and sure, wearing the face of kindness. And when it does, don't run from it. Let it carry you home. Now tell me, where in the world are you listening from tonight? Because every message, every comment, every heart that beats for these stories reminds me that no matter how far apart we are, we all understand the same thing: that love, real, patient, mountain-strong love, can thaw even the deepest winter. If you still believe in that kind of love, stay, because the next story might just be the one that finds you.